Good morning, folks. This is Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. This is the Podman Community Cabal meeting. We have just a couple of topics on the agenda today. The first one is whether or not we should close old issues after some amount of time on GitHub. And then Anders, and Matt will be leading that one. And Anders will be talking about using a SSH host directly without having to create a system connection or setting up a Unix domain socket tunnel. And with all that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt. Take it away, Matt.
Sure. So I was not the one who was supposed to be leading this. Neil, who was supposed to be handling this, is on PTO, but I will do my best to drive it through. So basic intent of this discussion. Let me actually get a real number for this. Got it. So we have, last I checked, a lot of issues open on Podman, and it's an ever-increasing number. The number is presently over 600. Several years ago, we said that we were going to make serious efforts to keep the number under 200, and that proved to be very not viable, and the number has been steadily increasing ever since. So we have a request to try and take that 600 number down at least somewhat. And we have two potential proposals on how to do this. One is declare issue bankruptcy. We close everything and then we let people reopen what they feel is still relevant. Two, we implement some sort of timed closure policy on existing issues such that if a bug has no activity from any party for, let's say, 90 days, we automatically close it, and that keeps the numbers tidy. Now, again, this is just a numbers thing. It doesn't actually fix the bugs. It just makes our GitHub look tidier. And I know that we have people in this call with strong opinions about that, including Ed, who I believe created a document on how we were supposed to handle these issues some years ago. So, Ed, any thoughts on this?
No, I haven't reviewed it, any of this since creating that document. I'm totally fine with just nuking anything that has been discarded or abandoned.
Rick?
Just a quick thought on this one, Matt. I usually work bugs from the other side of the fence where I'm opening them rather than on behalf of customers rather than working on them. Is it possible to add more horsepower to try and tip the balance so we're reducing the bug count? Can we bring more engineers on somehow?
I would love to do that, but at the moment I have had two people leave the team, and they're going to be replaced, but we're down on horsepower as opposed to up on horsepower, and I don't see that changing for at least the next 3 months. So I would be looking for regardless of that, also, there are bugs that just end up being opened and then left, and nobody really ends up closing them because the bug just sort of peters out. People stop responding, and it just kind of sits there. So I can see value to an auto-close functionality.
Very good. Thanks.
Paul?
So I'm not really fond of auto-closing in general because right now we are not keeping up at all on upstream, and if a bug hasn't been triaged and auto-closed, that's just I don't know how to say it. That's just disrespectful to the reporter. If nobody looks at it and the bot says, "Oh, there hasn't been any activity," I close it. Like, I understand that there are a bunch of issues in there that are no longer relevant or that a reporter no longer cares, but I would say that's probably still a minority. The other set of issues are either valid feature requests that are nice, but we don't prioritize, or are normal bugs. We also don't prioritize, so closing them doesn't make them go away. And if the goal is to have a shiny number, then I don't think having a shiny number is desirable.
Mohan?
I would like to go last, let others speak. and see.
Okay.
And let's capture others' input. Yeah.
Miloslav? You're muted,
You're
Miloslav.
The first question, I think, is can we keep up with the issues as they come? If we can't, then what we are doing, we are not going to be in exactly the same conversation 3 months from now. And it's like Paul said, it's a matter of expectations. If we can't handle the load, I think the reporters deserve to know. Though I don't know what that would look like. Maybe be close to issues and let only PRs in, I don't know. But something needs to happen to stem the tide. If the incoming flow is manageable and we just have a backlog, I'm tempted to say that features are different from bugs and maybe shouldn't be closed so aggressively. But ultimately, a bankruptcy with all the issues is plausible to me.
All right. Giuseppe?
Yeah, I agree with Paul. Like, yeah, we can, like, just closing them for the number. It's kind of, we can lose track of, well, especially for requests. Maybe we could have like a label, because there is a class of issues that we ask for more information, and then we just forget to check it. Like having to add a label like auto close when we wait for information. Maybe having like a timeout only for the ones we triaged and we are well blocked.
So it sounds like what we really want is something akin to Bugzilla need info, and then we'd auto close things that were set need info on Reporter for, say, 90 days. Because that's ultimately, I think there's a class of bug here where we have a bug that gets reported and the maintainer asks for more information, and 90 days later the information hasn't been provided. I'm fine with auto closing that. I think that Paul is probably right that we don't want to auto close things that haven't had any interaction at all for 90 days. But if it's 90 days of waiting on Reporter, I would be fine with closing that. I think the problem is that I don't think GitHub has the capability to do that sort of thing.
Okay. I prefer that what you're saying, Matt, and that's what I wanted to say actually. Like if we can do something like that, like Bugzilla wise, and if we cannot do that, if there is no possibility of doing that in GitHub, the other option is instead of auto closing them, we can write a bot like, say, well, if you haven't heard anything from someone in the last 90 days, ping them and ask them if it's still relevant or not. And maybe after 30 days or something like that, if they don't respond on that ticket, maybe close them after that initial ping.
If this is automatable, I am all in favor of it. I'm fearful if it's not integrated with GitHub and fully automated, it will be very difficult to manage.
I think you can do this with GitHub Actions. I'm not sure if there is a need info way of doing this, but at least the second one is doable, as far as I know.
If we could do a GitHub action that would like apply a label, and then when there's a comment from the specific person who the label is for, it removes that label, that would be great. I think that would solve a lot of our problems. Ed.
Yeah, we can maybe piggyback on that using the stale bot. There's the bot that just marks issues as stale after 30 days. We could treat that as need info, ask a question, and if stale bot triggers, use that as the flag to kill the issue.
I'm fine with that.
But the stale bot itself is a bit problematic because it hasn't the knowledge of which person is, asking a question. So it's just 30 days, no action is also meaning nobody has looked at it, right? 0 comments would also go into that. And the stalebot, I think, is much more problematic. It's just buggy as hell. There are issues for a year without a comment that weren't captured by the stalebot. Don't ask me why. I don't care. So it's not a reliable thing at all. So
I guess then we have to reframe the question, like maybe the bot will ask there is no activity and ask whether the reporter still wants this bug or feature added. Then if the reporter responds, then we don't close it. It doesn't matter who is responding at that point of time. The bot doesn't know, but at least there is a response on the ticket. It's just how we frame the question at that point of time.
Tom.
We started with we don't have a time to look at tickets, and we just introduced a process that requires us to look at a ticket and add a comment. It's a way to prioritize, but
Tom?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking a little bit, and then Miloslav came back on it, was whether or not, rather than using Stalebot or some bot to auto close the things, that they send a mail to maintainers or wherever and say this thing's old, take a look at it, and then have somebody actually physically review it before closing it. I don't know if that'd be more palatable or not. Again, more overhead administration for a person.
So that's what we used to do, or what Dan was pretty good at it. So if the stalebot commented, he looked at it and usually closed it out if it was like open questions and stuff. But yeah, he is no longer on our team, and he isn't that active anymore, at least on the issue side. So I think that's probably a large part, or one of the reasons why the issue count goes up. The other part is it's just more issues than we got before.
Yeah. I would say that the fact that we're getting more is just an indicative of more use, which is a good thing, but also a bad thing for us as maintainers. All right, so it sounds like we have a bunch of ideas, but most of these ideas are going to require scripting work. So this almost sounds like we should put someone on it and see what is possible within the GitHub Actions API. Like, can we make something that auto closes issues that are waiting for responders in the same way? Can we make something that identifies issues that are really old and have had no activity and prompts us to, maybe it doesn't even send an email, maybe it just spits out a report and tells us these are the issues that require attention, oldest first, and then we can go through like 5 of those a week. It wouldn't solve things perfectly, but it sounds doable. Anyways, I think what I'm saying is we probably should have time devoted for one person on the team to look at this at some point in the next couple weeks or couple months. How does that sound? Okay. I think that's a good action. Tom, I think we're good to move on.
All right. Any last comments, questions on this? Not hearing any. So with that, I think I'm going to move on to Anders' topic today, which was using a SSH host directly without having to create a system connection or setting up a Unix domain socket tunnel. Anders.
Yeah, so there was a user this weekend, I think it was, that created a Vagrant machine and then was connecting Podman to it, and wondered why it was so much more difficult to do it using the Podman client compared to the Docker client. So it's something that we discussed whether we had like Podman version 2 or something, but then we had Podman machine, and Podman machine automatically sets up the SSH connection. So then some of the problems were like hidden in the connection. and then other systems like Lima or Podman Desktop sets up a SSH tunnel for you, so the user only connects the Unix socket, and again the problem is not seen. But it was a reminder that we had some open issues from like 2023 or even before that, there is a lot of parameters that are mandatory in the SSH URL that maybe should not be. What I did was to dust up some old code so that you can read the SSH configuration also for the Golang implementation of SSH, which normally does not look at SSH config. I think that we have a half implemented native setting in Podman, so that some commands will call out the SSH binary and some will use Golang. But the end result is that it doesn't work with the SSH config. So what these systems like Vagrant or Lima do is that they add the SSH config, which contains the username and the port number and the host name, and also the identity key. And then you can access this alias instead of having to remember all these. It's especially annoying when you restart the VM and get a new port. In Podman machine, there is functionality to update this connection automatically, but it doesn't work for external systems. Anyway, so that was like a upcoming PR with some old Podman 4 code, so that you can now only do SSH to an alias, and it will fill in your username, it will fill in port 22 that was fixed before, and it will fill in the the Podman socket path from the host by logging into the host and running Podman info to see where the Unix socket lives on the remote side. So instead of remembering 4 different parameters, you only have to remember a short name, which you keep in your SSH config. I think I posted the number in the document here. Yeah, so that was that. Yeah. This is, by the way, only if you don't provide this information, like if the username is blank or the path is blank. If you have everything provided in the URL, then there is no code.
So, question, are Lima and the others editing the actual .config file in the user's SSH folder, or is there a way that they're making a separate file that has the identity?
It is a separate file. So the user will have to either symlink this into the directory or cat it into the config file if they wanted a part of it. Normally you use the -F, capital F even, to use the specific SSH config, but this is not covered by this code or anything. So the user is supposed to add the SSH config snippet for that host name into the normal paths, either by symlinking or by catting.
Okay, that's a lot less concerning than the actual SSH config. That makes me a little easier. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
It only parses those 4 parameters: username, host name, port, and identity key. So anything else would need to be supported by containers common and normal native SSH fork. So if you have anything else like a keep alive mux socket or what have you on your SSH connection, proxy jump was also discussed. All of that is handled by the normal SSH binary through containers common. Because you have like a SSH mode, it's called, like if you want to use a Go implementation or the SSH exec. So you would need to use that external SSH for those open SSH features that are not included in the Golang implementation of SSH.
I'm trying to. Does anyone on the call remember why we ended up using the Golang SSH? Brent isn't here, and Ashley also isn't here, and they would be the two I would ask most.
So initially, the idea was that we would not use the local binaries because that had caused a lot of grief with the varlink implementation, which required the SSH. It just became a support nightmare. So we did it in Golang because that made that support nightmare go away. But then we had enough people come back going, well, I want to do this or I want to do that, and I need the SSH binary to make whatever magic they wanted to happen. So that's how we ended up with both implementations. The idea was that with the Golang one, we owned it. We could control it, and as Anders pointed out, we had requirements that were hard requirements. We knew what was going on, and we did it that way.
Paul.
Yeah, so I think the native mode is probably just buggy in a sense that it doesn't work really, because it was implemented by Charlie, but then I think Charlie left before it was probably finished, because I looked at the code, there are no tests. So I wouldn't, if there are no tests, I would not expect it to work in general, that from working at this project.
I think it's used by some commands, but not by others. So like for instance, Podman FCP probably works fine, but Podman run does not. So it's
yeah, right. So SCP has extra code. Podman machine SSH also calls directly the binary all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit of a mess. I think the native mode can probably easily be fixed if somebody is interested in spending the time on that. But yeah, the Golang one, as you mentioned, like figuring out the defaults is probably also just a net win, like not having to provide the full socket path and user and so on.
And there was a nice Go library for parsing the SSH config file, so all of that was already taken care of, which made the implementation much easier.
I don't think we knew that existed, or it didn't exist when we wrote the initial Golang library implementation, because that was one of the things we looked for and couldn't find, and we just didn't take it on.
No, I think the use of SSH config files is somewhat new, because when we did this in like 2020 or 2022, everyone was passing around URLs rather than using config files.
Yep.
But now in 2024, it seems like SSH config files are getting more common. For instance, Lima is moving to use them and deprecating the show SSH command, as it was called. Vagrant is like deprecated in itself due to not being open source anymore. So who cares, right? And yeah, but anyway, those 4 parameters seems to be working fine. And I have some code that I tested on 4.9 of Podman, but I think it will rebase without any major issues. That it hasn't been that many changes to the bindings.
I wouldn't mind a change like that. Honestly, more concerning to me is that we should get our internals in order and switch to one SSH implementation and not have 2. But switching over to just use SSH configs makes sense to me, especially considering what we've done with system connections moving out of containers conf into a separate file. There's precedent for them not to be in the same place already.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it's not just 2 implementations, because you have your Java clients, you have your JavaScript clients like Podman Desktop, so you have a lot of implementations of the socket connection code. So one thing that can be improved on the Podman Desktop side of things is to move the current temporary socket hack from the Podman extension to Podman Desktop and move it into a like Podman Desktop feature. In that way, it would also work with like Docker and other extensions and so on. But it's quite new in the 1.12, so it's going through some early phases at the moment. One issue we had with like Lima was that it was hard to tell a local socket from a remote socket, like local to the host or remote in some cluster in some data center somewhere. That could be an interesting information for the user, but if we are just tunneling Unix sockets, then it's hard to tell from the local thing if it's a tunneled SSH or if it's actually a remote SSH.
I mean, we don't care on the Podman end, so that
no,
it's
Podman desktop that cares. It wants to show different icons for it.
Right. Well,
I think it will
the client wants that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it will just be a Boolean on the connection. Connection is the class that wraps the socket connection. So then each extension can just fill this Boolean in however it wants. I think the current implementation is like string starts with SSH : or something like that. It's not so advanced. But that's why it failed with the current Lima sockets. And that's why I looked at if we could feed the SSH connection from the Lima SSH config into Podman, and then I rediscovered all these old issues with adding the SSH. And also, it's a bit messy to have to know the remote user ID of the VM or the cluster VM that you are using. Maybe you do know your current user, or you can use the environment variable for the runtime directory, but if it's a remote VM, you have to guess the remote user ID. So in that sense, it's nicer if it figures it out. And I think that it does this today if you do connection add, but it doesn't do it if you just provide a -- host or environment variable URL or something.
Yeah, that sounds accurate. Those were always meant to be power user features, and I don't think we built any assistance into them.
Well, the connection add did. So Anders is right there. Connection add goes through that was supposed to be the helper, and it goes through a lot to try to figure out stuff.
Yeah, and I think it does. And that means that the original was never fixed because, like, as long as you're using connection, you don't see the problem.
Yep. And yes, the command line options, if you went that route, were whatever you gave it, it slammed in and tried to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, it would log in with like user empty string and stuff like that.
Yes, ugly things.
And it totally failed. It also has some really interesting error code if you pass in an invalid Unix socket, like an empty string for the Unix socket, because it will succeed to connect to the external site, so you don't get the nice host not found message or whatever you did with a missing alias, but you will still get a weird error for not being able to connect to the socket, because it thinks it's talking to HTTP server, and then it gets very surprised when it does not respond. And it tries to check the URL, and URL is fine, but the path is all wonky. Yeah, you get it doesn't help the original problem. You get weirder and weirder errors from the backend. Yeah, SSH reacted connect failed. That's nice. But anyway, that's 2 old bugs getting a PR, or maybe 2 PRs, maybe 1 PR.
No, I don't think I can promise it'll be worked on, but I will definitely get a card together on our end to work on unifying our SSH implementations, because having 2 just bothers me from a support perspective.
Yeah. But it's sort of nice to have like a built-in Golang fallback if OpenSSH becomes unavailable for some reason, be it licensing or weird operating system or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, I think we can talk about that, Matt, but I think you're stuck with 2.
That is tragic if true, but you're more familiar with the code than me, so.
And if you count Podman Desktop, you are probably going to be stuck with 3, unless whatever you are suggesting has a TypeScript implementation.
Yeah, no. And then, with Podman Pi, now we have 4.
But I do have some good news, and that is that Windows now support Unix sockets. So that's at least one less configuration. But I guess that's
nice.
only like the recent Windows. If you want to support older Windows, you still have 2. You have named pipes and Unix socket on Windows. So yeah, probably just makes it worse.
Yeah, we can switch to that in 20 years once the clients
exactly.
take out that one out.
Yeah, exactly. No, I didn't have anything further, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Anders. I was trying to catch up with the notes there for a moment. I think I've caught up. Any other questions, comments, any further ideas that we need to explore on this, Matt, or others?
No, I think they captured what needs to happen.
Okay, great. With that, that's all we had for topics today. Are there any topics from the folks here that wanted to be discussed? Any questions or comments in general? Okay. You're thinking that through, I'll put up a reminder for the next meetings. Our next community meeting is on October 1st. Don't pay attention to the agenda. That's on a Tuesday. Even number months are now community meetings. Odd number months are Cabal meetings. And so given that our next Cabal meeting will be on November 5th at 11 a.m. again, and both meetings actually will be at 11 a.m., although we will have a time switch just before the November one. And that, I will say, any further, one last call for topics or questions. Right, going once, I think I will stop the recording. And thank everybody for coming today.